Breathless endings and unpredictable twists are our specialty. We bring you the stories they don't want you to hear, told with a cinematic flair that is second to none. Hit subscribe now and prepare to be truly shocked. The moment my director said her name, I kept my expression perfectly neutral. I set the folder I'd been holding onto the conference table with both hands, very deliberately, and I smiled. "Congratulations to Diana," I said. "She'll do great." He looked almost relieved. He'd been expecting a reaction, maybe tears, maybe anger. He got neither. What he didn't know was that the folder I'd just set down contained nothing he needed to worry about yet. The folder I had waiting in my bag, however, was a different story entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began. I joined Hargrove and Lyle Publishing 12 years ago, fresh out of grad school with a literature degree and more ambition than sense. It was a mid-sized house, respected, not flashy, and I worked in acquisitions, which meant I spent my days reading manuscripts, building relationships with literary agents, and quietly developing what would become the company's most profitable division. I say quietly because that's the only word for it. I didn't announce my wins. I let the work speak. In my first 3 years, I signed 4 debut authors who went on to become household names in the commercial fiction space. I built a relationship with an agency in Chicago that no one at Hargrove had ever successfully worked with before. I developed a system for tracking emerging trends in the market that my director, Richard, eventually presented to the board as his own initiative. That last part stung. But I was 31, still trying to prove myself, and I told myself that's just how things worked at the beginning. By year 6, I was leading a team of 4. We were responsible for roughly 40% of the company's new acquisitions revenue. I had mentored 2 junior editors who'd both gone on to win industry awards. I had a reputation in the publishing world that extended well beyond Hargrove. Agents called me directly, authors requested me specifically, and at least twice I'd been approached by competing houses with offers I turned down because I genuinely loved my work. What I didn't love was watching the path to senior editorial director get longer every time I seemed to get close to it. The first time I was passed over was 7 years in. Richard told me the timing wasn't right. The company was restructuring. It wasn't a reflection of my performance. He used the phrase, incredibly valued, twice in under 4 minutes, which I've since learned is a reliable sign that someone is about to do the opposite of value you. He gave the position to a man named Greg, who'd been with the company for 2 years and whose most notable achievement to that point was a golf relationship with one of the board members. Greg lasted 14 months before quietly moving to a tech startup. The position opened again. I applied again. This time Richard told me he was seriously considering me, that I was the internal frontrunner, and that he just wanted to make sure the process was thorough. The process took 4 months. He hired someone externally. A man named Patrick, who asked me in his second week to explain what an acquisitions pipeline was. I explained it. Thoroughly. Without expression. Patrick lasted 11 months. By the time the position opened a third time, I had stopped asking anyone for anything. I just did my job at a level that was, frankly, difficult to ignore, and I started doing something else on the side that no one at Hargrove knew about. I'd begun consulting. Quietly. A contact of mine had left traditional publishing to launch an independent press focused on underrepresented voices, and she needed someone who understood how to build an acquisitions strategy from the ground up. I helped her on weekends and evenings, drawing strict boundaries around anything proprietary to Hargrove. Nothing I did crossed a line. I was careful about that. I'd spoken to an attorney friend about exactly where those lines were, and I stayed well clear of them. What I was building, in the margins of my real life, was proof that I didn't need Hargrove to validate what I already knew about myself. I was also, very quietly, becoming indispensable to our largest account. Hargrove had a relationship with a foundation called the Meridian Literary Fund, a nonprofit that commissioned and distributed educational anthologies for under-resourced school districts across the country. The contract was worth just under $2 million annually to Hargrove, and it had been mine to manage for 6 years. I knew the foundation's director, a woman named Barbara, personally. I knew her team. I knew what mattered to them, what frustrated them, what they felt Hargrove consistently failed to deliver, and what kept them renewing the contract year after year despite those frustrations. What kept them renewing was me. Barbara had told me this directly, more than once, in ways that were clear and unmistakable. "You're the reason we trust this process," she said to me once over lunch. "If you left, I don't know that we'd stay." I'd thanked her and filed that information away without fully knowing what I would eventually do with it. Now I was starting to know. The third time the senior editorial director position opened up, I prepared differently. I documented everything, every account I managed, every relationship I'd built, every author I'd signed, every dollar my team had generated. I built a formal presentation. I asked for a meeting with Richard, not to beg for the role, but to present a case so airtight that refusing it would require active, deliberate effort. He watched my presentation with an expression that I now recognize as a man who has already made a decision but hasn't yet figured out how to say it. He nodded in the right places. He said "impressive" twice. At the end, he told me he'd circle back by end of month. He circled back in 3 weeks. He called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, and he sat across from me with his hands folded, and he said, "We've decided to go with Diana for this one. She brings a fresh perspective, and frankly, the team has responded really well to her energy." Diana had been at Hargrove for 18 months. She was talented. I want to be clear about that, because this isn't a story about Diana being incompetent. She was genuinely good at her job. She was also very good at something else, which was making Richard feel interesting. She laughed at everything he said in meetings. She sent him articles she thought he'd enjoy. She volunteered for his visibility projects. She was, in the language of my third-place comment analysis, managing up, and she was doing it exceptionally well. None of that was her fault. The system rewarded it. That's a problem with the system, not with Diana. But sitting across from Richard in that moment, hearing fresh perspective used as a reason to pass over 12 years of documented, measurable, revenue-generating work, something shifted in me. Not into anger. Anger would have been easier. What shifted was something quieter and more final. I had spent 12 years waiting for this company to see what I was worth. I was done waiting. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for letting me know. You're incredibly valued here," he said. There it was again. "I know," I said, and I meant it differently than he intended. I picked up my folder, I smiled, and I walked out. That evening, I called Barbara. I didn't lead with anything dramatic. I asked how she was, how her team was doing, whether the spring anthology timeline was still on track. We talked for 20 minutes about everything except what I actually wanted to discuss. Because that's what a real relationship sounds like. It isn't transactional. And I wasn't about to make it feel that way. Near the end of the call, I said, "Barbara, I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve to know before it becomes relevant. I'm starting to explore what the next chapter of my career looks like. Nothing is decided yet, but I want you to have enough time to think about what that might mean for you, if anything." There was a pause. "Define explore," she said. "I'm considering starting something of my own," I said. "A boutique acquisitions and editorial consulting firm. Smaller, more focused. The kind of operation that could dedicate real attention to accounts that deserve it." Another pause. "Longer this time." "How soon?" she asked. "I'd want to do it properly. Give Hargrove appropriate notice. Make sure the transition is handled with integrity." "Sarah," she said, and the way she said my name carried everything. "If you go independent, I want to be your first conversation." I told her I'd be in touch. I hung up the phone and sat very still in my kitchen for a long moment. Then I called my attorney. Over the next 6 weeks I did everything right. I registered an LLC. I set up the infrastructure, a business account, a proper website, basic contracts reviewed by a professional. I reached out carefully to 3 literary agents I had genuine long-term relationships with. Not to poach business, but to let them know I was making a transition, and to plant a seed about what I was building. I reviewed my employment contract with Hargrove line by line, confirming exactly what I could and could not do. I was meticulous about this. I wasn't going to give anyone a legitimate reason to come after me. I also kept doing my job. Fully, completely, without any visible change. I signed 2 manuscripts in that 6-week window. I delivered the spring anthology materials to Barbara's team ahead of schedule. I mentored my junior editor through a difficult negotiation. I left no loose ends. What I did not do was tell anyone at Hargrove what was coming. The morning I was ready, I came in early. I printed 2 documents. One was my formal resignation letter, effective in 2 weeks, professional and brief, thanking the company for 12 years and wishing everyone well. The other was a letter from Barbara, on Meridian Literary Fund letterhead, addressed to Hargrove's executive team, notifying them that upon my departure the foundation would be exercising its contractual right to renegotiate terms and that, pending those renegotiations, they were redirecting their upcoming contract renewal discussions to a new firm. My firm. Barbara had drafted that letter herself. I had not asked her to be unkind or dramatic. She was neither. She was simply honest, which is what I had always been with her, and she was returning the favor. I put both documents in a single envelope. I walked into Richard's office at 8:45 in the morning. He was on the phone. He held up one finger, the universal gesture for, "I'll be a minute," and I waited, standing, until he finished. When he hung up, I set the envelope on his desk. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation," I said. "And something else you'll want to see. I wanted to give it to you in person." He opened the envelope. He read the first document. His expression moved through several phases. Then he reached the second document. He read it twice. I watched his face the way you watch a slow, inevitable thing happen. "Sarah, I want to be clear," I said, "that I didn't solicit this. Barbara and I have a relationship built over 6 years. She made her own decision, and she wanted to communicate it directly to leadership. I thought it was only right to deliver it in person rather than let you hear about it through other channels." "You can't," he stopped. Started again. "We could revisit the director position." I looked at him for a moment. 12 years passed through my mind in about 3 seconds, every idea absorbed without credit. Every incredibly valued. Every Greg and Patrick. Every closed door dressed up as timing. "I appreciate that," I said. "But I think we're past that point." I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. I turned around once, not for drama, but because there was one more thing I wanted to say. For what it's worth, Richard, Diana is going to need real support in that role. I hope you actually give it to her. She's talented, and she deserves better than what I got. He didn't say anything. I walked out. The next 2 weeks were strange. Word got around the office quickly, the way it always does. Some people avoided me. Others stopped by my desk with the slightly stunned look of people witnessing something they can't quite categorize. Was this brave or reckless? I could see them trying to decide. My 2 junior editors asked to meet with me separately. Both of them, in different conversations, said some version of the same thing. They wanted to know if there was a place for them where I was going. I told them I couldn't discuss that in any official capacity until after my last day, but that I would love to stay in touch. Both of them gave notice within 3 weeks of my departure. The executive team requested a transition meeting. I attended. I was cooperative. I documented everything thoroughly. I handed over every relevant file and contact in good order. I was professional in a way that I think confused them slightly, because they'd been expecting something messier. What I understood that they didn't was that integrity in an exit is its own form of power. I had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. I just had somewhere else to be. My last day, I packed a small box, mostly personal things, a few books, the framed letter from an author I'd signed years ago, who'd written to thank me for believing in her manuscript when 3 other houses had passed. I walked through the floor, said goodbye to the people I genuinely cared about, and took the elevator down. The lobby had a revolving door. I've always quietly hated revolving doors. That morning I pushed through it and felt the November air and thought, there it is. That's what the other side feels like. I called Barbara from the parking garage. "I'm out," I said. "Good," she said. "I'll have my team send over the paperwork Monday morning. We've been holding the renewal intentionally." The Meridian contract came through 6 weeks after I launched. It wasn't just a renewal, Barbara had expanded the scope. The foundation was growing, taking on 3 new school districts, and she wanted more comprehensive editorial support than Hargrove had ever been positioned to provide. My firm could offer that. My firm was designed to offer exactly that. By the end of my first year, I had 4 clients. 2 were relationships I'd built independently before ever leaving Hargrove. 1 was a referral from Barbara. 1 came through an agent who'd heard I'd launched and reached out directly. My team was 3 people: myself, 1 of my former junior editors, and a contracts manager I'd known peripherally for years who was ready to work somewhere smaller. We weren't large. We weren't trying to be. What we were was specific. Focused. Genuinely good at the thing we did. In a publishing landscape full of large houses making broad bets, there was real demand for a small operation that would read your entire manuscript before offering an opinion, that would call you back the same day, that would tell you the truth even when it was inconvenient. That was what I'd always done. Now I just got to do it for myself. About 8 months after I left, one of my remaining contacts at Hargrove, someone I'd stayed genuinely friendly with, texted me to say that the Meridian account loss had triggered a broader budget review. 2 other accounts had also raised concerns during renewal conversations. Richard had been moved to a strategic advisory role, which in publishing is a phrase that means something specific and not particularly good for the person it's applied to. Diana had been given the director title but not the resources or the support to succeed in it, which was exactly what I had feared for her. I didn't feel triumphant reading that. I felt tired on her behalf. And I felt something that took me a minute to name, which was that I was glad not to be there anymore. Not because of the drama, but because of the absence of it. Because I had spent so many years inside a situation that required me to work twice as hard as everyone around me just to stay in place. And I hadn't even fully realized how exhausting that was until I stepped out of it. The thing no one tells you about finally doing the thing you were always capable of is that it doesn't feel like a victory, exactly. It feels like relief. Like putting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd stopped noticing the weight. The February after I launched, I got a handwritten card from Barbara. She sends them sometimes, she's one of those people who still does that, and I love her for it. This one said, "The work we're doing together this year is some of the most meaningful of my career. I hope you know what you built here." I pinned it above my desk. Not because I needed the reminder, but because it was nice to have something in writing. I still have it.